The moment Claire stood up at the Thanksgiving table, everyone knew something was coming, but no one expected it to land like a quiet explosion. The Walker family dining room looked like a picture from a holiday magazine. Golden light from the chandelier, white plates neatly arranged, steam rising from dishes that had taken all day to prepare. Outside, late November wind brushed against the windows of the old Vermont house that had stood for more than 50 years. Inside, tradition sat heavily in the air. Ethan Walker had just flown in from Seattle that morning. He was tired, still wearing the stiffness of airport crowds and long security lines, but he smiled anyway. He always did. At 34, he had learned that being agreeable was easier than being honest. He sat across from his parents, Margaret and Richard, both glowing with pride and comfort. They looked settled, rooted, like people who believed life had turned out exactly as it should. To Ethan's left sat his younger sister, Claire, perfect posture, calm, smile. Dressed like someone who always expected to be listened to. Thanksgiving had always been like this. Ethan visited. Claire hosted conversations. Their parents beamed. Nothing openly wrong, nothing fully right. Dinner moved smoothly. Polite talk about weather, work, and travel plans. Ethan spoke about Seattle, his job in tech. The rainy mornings, the long hours. His parents nodded but didn't ask many questions. Claire spoke about her local business, her plans, her involvement in community events. Everyone leaned in. Then dessert arrived. Pumpkin pie, whipped cream, coffee poured carefully into old mugs that had survived decades. Claire set her fork down. "I'm really thankful this year," she said, her voice light but firm, more than ever. Ethan felt a small tightening in his chest. Claire never spoke without a reason. She glanced at their parents, who suddenly became very focused on their plates. "Mom and Dad have decided something important," Claire continued. "They're signing the house over to me." Silence. The kind that doesn't echo but presses down. Ethan blinked, sure he had misheard. "The house," he said quietly, almost to himself. Claire turned toward him with a practiced smile. "Yes, this house. The same house Ethan had learned to ride a bike in. The same stairs where he'd sat at 17, heartbroken after his first real rejection. The same porch where his father once promised, no matter where life takes you, this will always be home." Ethan looked at his parents. Margaret folded her napkin slowly. Richard cleared his throat. "It just made sense," Richard said. "Claire lives nearby. She's more present." Present. The word stung more than Ethan expected. Claire leaned back slightly, confident. "You're doing well, Ethan. You moved away. You built your own life. You don't really need this place." The words were calm, almost kind. That made them worse. Ethan felt heat rise behind his eyes but forced it down. He didn't want to argue. He didn't want to beg. He didn't want to look like the outsider. He suddenly felt like, "So," Claire added softly, "you get nothing. But you'll be fine." Margaret finally looked at him, her eyes full of something close to regret, but she said nothing. Ethan nodded once. "That's good," he said, surprising even himself with how steady his voice sounded. "I'm glad you're happy." Claire smiled, relieved. The tension eased. Conversation slowly restarted, as if the announcement had been no more important than discussing holiday plans. Ethan pushed his chair back. "Excuse me," he said. "I need some air." No one stopped him. Outside, the cold hit his face like a wake-up call. The porch light flickered softly. Snow crunched under his shoes as he stepped off the wooden steps. He stared at the house. Not Claire's house. Not yet. But no longer his either. Ethan remembered helping his father fix the roof after a storm. Remembered his mother waving from the window when he left for college. Remembered every moment he believed that distance didn't erase belonging. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. Inside, voices rose and fell. Laughter. Normal life. Ethan felt something shift. Not anger, not sadness exactly, but understanding. He had been away too long. Or maybe he had never really been seen. Later that night, lying in his old bedroom, he stared at the ceiling. The same glow-in-the-dark stars were still faintly visible, stuck there years ago. He wondered why his parents hadn't called him first. Why the decision felt so final, so easy. He didn't sleep much. The next morning, the house felt different, smaller, less welcoming. Claire moved through the rooms like an owner already, making suggestions, talking about renovations. Ethan packed his suitcase quietly. At breakfast, Margaret finally spoke. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "It just happened." Ethan smiled gently. "Things don't just happen, Mom." She looked away. Before leaving, Ethan walked through the house one last time. He touched the banister, the kitchen counter, the front door frame where his height had been marked in pencil over the years. Then he stepped outside. As he loaded his bag into the car, he realized something important. He wasn't just leaving a house. He was leaving the idea that love was guaranteed just because it shared your last name. And he didn't yet know it, but that realization was only the beginning. Ethan didn't plan to stay in Vermont. He told himself it was only a short visit, a way to handle the awkward Thanksgiving without confrontation. But the moment he stepped outside the Walker house after Claire's announcement, he realized something had changed. The house that had always felt like a safe harbor now seemed foreign, distant, claimed by someone else. He couldn't just fly back to Seattle and pretend nothing happened. He needed time to think, to breathe, to find some clarity. The next morning, he wandered through the quiet streets of his hometown. The snow had melted slightly overnight, leaving wet sidewalks and the smell of early winter in the air. He found himself drawn to Main Street, past the little bakery where he had once bought cinnamon rolls with his sister, past the coffee shop where he had spent afternoons reading in high school. It felt strange, familiar, and strangely lonely all at once. He didn't notice the small bookstore until he was practically in front of it. Its wooden sign, painted green and gold, swung slightly in the breeze. The door chimed softly as he entered. The smell of old books and fresh coffee wrapped around him, a warmth he hadn't realized he was craving. Behind the counter was a young woman with chestnut hair pulled into a loose ponytail and sharp, thoughtful eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was gentle but carried a quiet confidence. Ethan hesitated. "I'm just looking," he said, more to himself than to her. She smiled slightly, watching him as he moved through the aisles. "You're Ethan Walker, right? Richard and Margaret's son." He froze. "Yes," he said cautiously. "How did you know?" "My mom lives next door," she explained. "She's been neighbors with your parents for years. She's told me about the family." Her tone was casual, but there was an unspoken understanding in her eyes. Ethan nodded, unsure what to make of it. They began talking. At first it was small talk books, weather, the odd history of the town. But conversation quickly grew into something deeper, something real. Ethan found himself talking about Seattle, his life, and the emptiness he hadn't realized he carried. She listened without judgment, without interruption, and for the first time in months he felt heard. Her name was Lena Harper. She had lived in Vermont her entire life, though she had dreams of moving away at one point. Life had kept her close to family in town, shaping her in ways both gentle and firm. Ethan was drawn to her calm presence, the way she seemed to understand that not all losses were the end of the world, and that some endings were beginnings in disguise. Days passed, and Ethan kept finding reasons to return to the bookstore. Sometimes it was just for a book, sometimes for the quiet conversation that Lena offered. They talked about everything: books, heartbreak, hopes for the future. Lena had experienced disappointment herself, a past love that had ended quietly but left lessons that shaped who she was. Ethan realized he had been carrying disappointment too, wrapped tightly around his sense of belonging, his ideas of family, and even his own self-worth. One evening, after a long walk through the town, they stopped in front of the Walker house. Snow was falling lightly, covering the yard in a soft white blanket. Warm light spilled from the windows, and laughter echoed faintly. The same laughter that had made Ethan feel excluded a few days before. He watched the house for a long time, silent. "This place," he said quietly, "was never really mine. I just assumed it would be because it's home." Lena stood beside him, watching the same windows. "Home isn't always a building," she said softly. It's the people who choose to be part of it. And sometimes the people who matter most aren't the ones you expect. Her words struck him deeply. Ethan realized that for years he had measured love and family by possession and proximity, expecting loyalty and belonging just because he was born into it. Now he understood that belonging wasn't given, it was earned, chosen, and nurtured. Ethan stayed in Vermont a little longer than he expected. With Lena, he explored parts of the town he had forgotten or never noticed. They went to the river where they skipped stones, to the small park where autumn leaves still clung stubbornly to branches. He began to feel a sense of peace, a connection to something real and steady. Something that didn't require approval from people who had failed to see him. Meanwhile, back at the Walker house, life moved on. Claire settled into the house as if she had been destined to own it all along. Margaret and Richard tried to explain their decision, writing letters and sending texts, but their words felt hollow. Ethan read them, understood them, and then set them aside. He realized the closure he sought wouldn't come from them. It would come from within. On the last night of his extended stay, Ethan and Lena sat by the small bookstore's fireplace, the glow casting soft shadows across their faces. Snow fell heavily outside, blanketing the streets in white silence. Ethan felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. A feeling of being seen and appreciated for who he truly was, not what he could inherit or claim. "I didn't expect this," Ethan said quietly, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee cup. "I thought returning here would just remind me of what I lost, and did it?" Lena asked, leaning closer, her voice gentle. "No," he admitted. "It reminded me what I still have to find." She smiled, a mixture of hope and understanding. Sometimes losing something you think is yours makes space for something better. The next morning, Ethan packed his bag. His heart was heavier with goodbye, but lighter with realization. Vermont had taken from him the illusion of security in the Walker house, but had given him something far more valuable: clarity, independence, and a chance at something new. As he drove away, the house disappeared behind a bend in the road, snow swirling in the sunlight. He glanced at the envelope Lena had handed him before leaving, neatly folded with her handwriting inside. A simple invitation. "If you ever want to come back, I'll be here." Ethan smiled. He understood now that some doors close, not to punish, but to guide. Some losses are openings in disguise. And some paths, unexpected and unplanned, lead exactly where you were meant to be all along. By the time he reached the interstate, Ethan felt a sense of resolve. The house was gone, Claire had her victory, and his parents had their choices. But Ethan had discovered something that could never be signed over or taken away: a heart ready to love again. A future waiting to be chosen, and a connection that was entirely his own. For the first time in years, he felt the thrill of starting over, not from anger, not from revenge, not from loss, but from the quiet certainty that life had a way of leading him to exactly what he needed, just when he didn't know he was searching for it. And for Ethan Walker, that search had only just begun.